I'll show you how to synchronize animation with sound in DaVinci Resolve. We'll do a musical example, but the same techniques can be used for any type of sound. We'll be switching between the Edit and Fusion pages. The Edit page will be used to mark out the waveforms, which will guide the animation, and to check our animation for syncing issues. And all animation will be done in the Fusion page. Fusion doesn't have good support for audio, thus the hybrid approach. Okay, the music's on the timeline. Let's hear it. Before animating, you'll want to play through a clip many times to really get to know it. I've already done that for this clip. Let's start with an animation based on a prominent beat. Looking at the waveforms, this one stands out. Let's play the clip. It's a repeating pattern. I'll mark out the first instance and use the Spline Editor to repeat the pattern. To place a marker, first position the playhead where you'd like the marker to be and press the M key. The marker needs to be placed on the timeline ruler, so no clip should be selected. Otherwise, the marker will be placed on the clip and won't be visible when we go into Fusion. I'll place the playhead right at the beginning of the waveform, where the beat is strongest. You can use the left and right arrow keys to move the playhead a single frame at a time. You may not always be able to get it exact, but get as close as you can. It'll be good enough. I'll press M to place the marker. I'll place another marker at the end of the beat's waveform, just before the next beat. Now we have to create a Fusion composition. In the Media pool, I'll right-click and select New Fusion Composition. I'll name it Music Animation. I'll bring it down into the timeline and make it the same length as the music clip. With the playhead over the clip, I'll click the Fusion tab at the bottom. If you want to hear audio in Fusion, add a Media In node. There's no need to connect it to anything. You can just set it aside. I'll add a background node to start. I'll give it a dark gray color. I'm going for an autumnal theme. We'll use vector shapes for the animation since they're not processor intensive. I'll deselect the background node and press Shift Spacebar and type S rectangle. I'll press 1 to load it into Viewer 1. I'll make it a tiny rectangle. In the inspector, I'll set width to 0.047 and height to 0.015. I worked all this out beforehand. I'll click the Style tab and set color to medium blue. This is a vector shape, so we need to connect it to an sRender node to transform it into a bitmap. With the rectangle node selected, I'll add an sRender node by pressing Shift Spacebar. I'll connect it to the background's output. That automatically creates a merge node for us. There's the rectangle in Viewer 1. I'll open the Spline Editor. I'll close the node editor so we have more room. You can see the markers we added at the top. The Spline Editor is laid out as a graph. The horizontal axis along the top represents time. Time is measured in frames, so those are frame numbers you see. I'll move the playhead to frame 0 by pressing Command left arrow, Control left arrow in Windows. Notice that the playhead in the time ruler under the viewer is at frame 0, and it's also at frame 0 in the Spline Editor. Moving the playhead on the time ruler also moves the playhead in the Spline Editor, and vice versa. The vertical axis on the left represents a value. All parameters have numerical values. When a parameter is keyframed, a spline is added. A spline is represented as a line going across the graph. It shows the value of a keyframe parameter at a given frame. To the left of the vertical axis is the header. The names of any parameters we keyframe will be listed here. At the bottom is the Spline Editor toolbar. I'll explain some of its options as we go along. You can pan the graph from left to right and up and down with the mouse, or by using the scroll bars at the bottom and right side of the graph. And you can click drag along the top and left side to adjust the graph. Let's begin our animation. I'll click the nodes icon to open the node editor and select the rectangle node. I'll close the node editor. I'll have the rectangle expand its width on the beat and then shrink back to its original size. The first marker is right on the beat. I'll right-click on it and select Set Current Time At to position the playhead directly over it. Now I'll press the left arrow key to move one frame back. This is where we'll set our first keyframe. In the inspector, I'll select the Controls tab and keyframe the width field. A spline has been added to the Spline Editor. The tiny square on the spline represents a keyframe. On the far left in the header, the Yes rectangle node is listed, and under it the width field. To the right of the width field, there's a colored dot that corresponds to the color of its spline in the graph. In the inspector, the width field has a value of 0.047. In the Spline Editor, I'll tap the plus sign key to zoom in. It's probably too small to see, but the spline is at the 0.047 mark. I'll tap the minus sign key to zoom out. I'll move ahead one frame by pressing the right arrow key so we're directly over the marker. I'll keyframe the width field again. The rectangle will shrink to its original size after expanding, so I'll keyframe the width field at the second marker position. This will hold the field's value, so I don't have to set it manually. This will save me the trouble of remembering or looking up what the original value was. I'll right-click over the second marker and choose Set Current Time At to position the playhead. I'll keyframe the field. To expand the rectangle, I'll press Option left arrow, Alt left arrow in Windows to move to the second keyframe. This is the keyframe on the strongest part of the beat. I'll set the width field to its default value by clicking on the tiny dot under its slider. The spline has changed. Reading the graph, we see that the width field has a value of 0.05 at frame 38. I'll click the Zoom to Fit button. Notice how the value of the width field rapidly increases to its max value at the first marker position at frame 38, and gradually returns to its original value at the second marker position at frame 68. Let's go to the Edit page and play it to see what it looks like. I'll press Function left arrow, Home key in Windows to position the playhead at the beginning of the timeline. Looks good. Notice how it shrinks back to size as the playhead moves to the end of the beat's waveform. I'll play it again. So that's just one beat. Now we need to animate the other instances of this beat. I said the Spline Editor can repeat it for us, so let's do that. Back to the Fusion page. I'll click Zoom to Fit. We'll repeat or loop this pattern that you see. First, we need to select all the points. You can press Command A, Control A in Windows, or you can click the Select All button on the toolbar. Now all we have to do is click the Set Loop button on the toolbar. I'll zoom out by tapping the minus sign key so you can see the repeating pattern. Let's return to the edit page to see what it looks like. It's not in sync with the beat. What went wrong? Let's take a look at the waveform. Here's the first instance of the beat, and here's the second and third instances. We set our keyframes at the beginning and end of the beat waveform, so it's only this pattern that's being repeated. That's throwing the timing off because at the end of the waveform, there's an extra bit of time before the next instance of the beat. That extra bit of time has to be accounted for. So how do we do that? It's simple. We'll just add a keyframe right before the next instance of the beat. We don't have to do anything with it. It just gives the Spline Editor something to select. So let's set a marker just before that second beat hits. Let's go back to Fusion. I'll press Command Z, Control Z in Windows to undo the loop. You can also undo the loop by pressing the Set Loop button on the toolbar again. Just make sure the original pattern is selected first. Now let's add a keyframe at the third marker position. The playhead's already there, so I'll keyframe the width field. Let's select all the points again by clicking the Select All button on the toolbar and then clicking the Set Loop button. That should do it. Let's go to the Edit page and find out. It worked. Now let's animate another beat. We'll do the very first one. Let's play the clip. See if you can hear when the first beat repeats. To my ears, that beat occurs in pairs. The second beat of the pair is lower in pitch than the first. I'll play it again and point out the beats as they occur. We'll mark out the first pair of beats and then use the Spline Editor to repeat the pattern for us. I'll delete the old markers first. From the Mark menu, I'll select Delete All Markers All. I want to do a slightly different animation for each beat of the pair. That's why I'm marking out both. We'll set a marker on the strongest part of the beats as before, and also a third one just before the first beat of the next pair to nail the timing when we loop the pattern. And I'll place the third marker. Back to Fusion. I'll open the Node Editor and close the Spline Editor. Let's use an ellipse shape for this animation. I'll add an S-ellipse node. This is a vector shape as well. First, I'll deselect the merge node. I'll load it into Viewer 1. I'll set width and height to 0.079. Again, I worked all this out beforehand. I'll click the Style tab and set the color to light green. We need to connect this to an sMerge node. It's a special merge node for vector shapes. We'll attach the shape nodes to the sMerge node. Then we'll attach the sMerge node to the sRender node. I'll add an sMerge node by pressing Shift spacebar. The ellipse is connected to the yellow background input. Now I'll connect the rectangle to the sMerge node. And I'll connect the sMerge node to the sRender node. The ellipse is behind a rectangle right where I want it. I'll select the ellipse node and close the node editor and open the Spline Editor. I'll use the minus key to zoom out so we can see all the markers. I want the shape and color of the ellipse to change on the beat and then revert to what it was before the beat. Like before, we'll move back one frame in front of the marker by pressing the left arrow key. In the inspector, I'll right-click and select Animate Color Group. And I'll keyframe the width and height fields on the Controls tab. In the Spline Editor, the splines for the ellipse and the rectangle are both active. We don't need to keyframe the rectangle, so I'll click its checkbox in the spline header to make it spline read-only. When the check mark is replaced by a dot, it means the spline is read-only. It can't be changed. Clicking on it again will disable the spline and make it invisible. To edit the spline, click the checkbox until a check mark appears. The spline will then be active. I'll leave it as read-only. Let's move ahead one frame so we're directly over the marker by pressing the right arrow key. I'll press Command K, Control K in Windows. This has keyframed the width, height, and color fields. Now to the next marker. Move one frame back and set the keyframes by pressing Command K, Control K in Windows. Move ahead a frame and set the keyframes. And I'll set keyframes on the last marker. Let's go back to the first marker. I'll set the width field to its default value by clicking the tiny dot. And I'll change the color to pink. Now to the next marker. This time I'll change color to purple. And I'll set the height field to its default value. Let's go to the edit page and see how it looks. That looks all right. Let's go back to the Spline Editor and loop the pattern. I'll zoom the fit so we can see better. Again, select all the points and then click the Set Loop button on the toolbar. Let's check it out. Back to the edit page. Right on the beat. I'd like the ellipse to get back to its original size a bit quicker. By the time it gets to here, and then here, it should be back to its original size. I'll delete the existing markers and add new ones. Let's go to the Spline Editor. I'll click on the graph to deselect the points and position the playhead on the first marker. I'll select the S-ellipse node in the header so its controls appear in the inspector. I'll set width to the same value as height. Now to the next marker. And I'll set height to the same value as width. You may be wondering about the loop pattern. Has it been updated? It certainly has, but the proof is in the pudding, so let's head back to the edit page and see. That's great. Now let's animate these beats. I'll play it. I'll mark out the beats like before, putting a marker on the strongest part of each beat and one more at the end of the pattern to get the timing right. First, I'll delete the existing markers. Okay, that's done. Back to Fusion. I'll close the Spline Editor and open the Node Editor. Let's use a star shape this time. I'll deselect the Merge node by clicking in an empty area and add an S-star node. I'll load it into Viewer 1. I'll uncheck Solid in the inspector and adjust border width. Now depth. I'll set angle to 62.6. This is something I worked out beforehand. And a light orange color to go with the autumnal theme. I want this behind all the other shapes, so I'll disconnect the ellipse node from the background input of the sMerge node and connect the star node. I'll reconnect the ellipse node. It's in front of the rectangle, not what I want. I'll disconnect both the ellipse and rectangle nodes and reconnect the ellipse and then the rectangle. Sometimes it takes some fiddling to get right. Okay, you can always string sMerge nodes together. That may be the easiest thing. I'll select the star node and close the node editor and open the Spline Editor. The existing splines are too distracting, so I'll disable them. I'll position the playhead on the first marker. Now let's move back a frame. I'm going to keyframe two fields, depth and angle, both on the Controls tab. The star will expand and spin on each beat. I'll move ahead one frame. I'll click on the Spline Editor to make it active and press Command-K, Control-K in Windows to set keyframes on the depth and angle fields. To the next marker, back a frame and set the keyframes. And a header frame and set the keyframes again. Same drill for the third marker. I'm having everything return to its original value, so it's easier to keyframe everything ahead of time. The 3 beats are marked out. Now we'll set keyframes on the 4th marker position. This last set of keyframes is just so our loop pattern will be in time with the music. Back to the 1st marker position by pressing Option left arrow, Alt left arrow in Windows. This is the 1st beat. I'll set depth to its default value and angle to 86. Again, I worked these numbers out beforehand to save time. Now to the next marker. Remember the markers are on the beats. I'll set depth to its default value again, and this time I'll set angle to -86. The next beat. Depth to its default and angle to 86. That should do it. Let's loop the pattern. Select all the points and click Set Loop. Let's see if it works. That's great. Now those thumping beats at the end, let's do something for them too. There's a heavy beat to begin, then there's 2 more that repeat after that. I'll play it. The pattern for the 2nd and 3rd beats repeats at the end. Let's do a camera shake on those heavy beats to visually emphasize them. I'll mark out the first 3 beats. We'll duplicate the 2nd and 3rd beats using the Spline Editor. First, I'll delete the existing markers. That's done, so into Fusion. I'll close the Spline Editor and open the Node Editor. I'll add the camera shake node right after the sRender node. I'll select the sRender node. I'll use the 2nd camera shake node in the list. I like that one better. I'll play the clip so I can adjust the effect. I think that'll be okay. I'll click on the Settings tab and set the blend slider all the way to the left so the effect's not visible. I'll close the Node Editor and open the Spline Editor. I'll disable the S-star node. I'll position the playhead on the 1st marker. I'll move back a frame and keyframe the blend field. I'll move ahead 1 frame and keyframe the blend field again. Same thing for the 2nd and 3rd markers. And for the last marker, I'll just position the playhead over it and keyframe the blend field. This one's to keep time with the music. Now I'll move back to the 1st marker position and slide blend all the way to the right to turn on the camera shake effect. And I'll do the same for the next two markers. Now to repeat the pattern, we'll do something different. Up to now, we've been using the Set Loop button on the toolbar. That loops the pattern right to the end of the clip. This time, we'll tell Resolve to repeat the pattern once only. To do that, I'll select the points associated with the last three markers. First, I'll click the Zoom to Fit button. I'll draw a bounding rectangle around the keyframes to select them. Now I'll right-click and choose Duplicate and then Loop from the menu. Number of loops is set to 1, so I'll click OK. I'll zoom to fit. This time the pattern has been duplicated along with the keyframes, and unlike when using Set Loop, changing the original pattern will not update its repetitions. Okay, let's play this back and see if it works. Right on the money. Let's go back to the Spline Editor and refine our animation. First thing I'd like to do is change the color of the ellipse when it expands in height to blue instead of purple. I'll disable the camera shake spline and enable the ellipse spline. I'll zoom to fit. I'll position the playhead on the beat where it turns purple. In the Style tab, I'll change the color to blue. I'll disable the ellipse spline and enable the rectangle spline. Keyframes can be moved. I'll click the Time Stretch button on the toolbar. And I'll select the keyframe at the position where the rectangle has shrunk back to its original size. I can move it to the left to make the rectangle shrink back to its original size sooner, or move it to the right so it takes longer. You can see the loop pattern updating as I move the keyframe. When you're done, just click the Time Stretch button again. I'll disable the S rectangle spline and enable the ellipse width and height splines only. A shape box can be used to move one or more keyframes from left to right, as with Time Stretch, or to change the value of one or more selected parameters by moving their splines up and down. Click the Shape Box button on the toolbar and select the point or points you want to edit. A box appears around the points. I'll stretch the box upwards and downwards. As I do so, you can see the ellipse changing shape. And stretching and shrinking the box horizontally moves the keyframes. I'll undo that by pressing Command-Z, Control-Z in Windows. To get rid of the shape box, click its button on the toolbar again. I'll enable all the splines. I'll click the Zoom to Fit button. These are all the splines for our animation. We can easily shape the splines to modify our animation. I'll click the Select All button on the toolbar. Sometimes you have to click it twice to select all the points. I don't know why. We have Step In and Step Out buttons on the toolbar. They'll turn the animation into on-off states. I'll click Step In to demonstrate. All the splines are right angles now, creating on-off states. Let's play the clip on the Edit page. Interesting. Let's go back to Fusion. I'll click the Linear button on the toolbar to get back to the original. There's also a Smooth button. That will add easing to our splines. I'll click it. The splines have been rounded. Notice that each keyframe has a pair of handles. You can use them to change the shape of the spline. Adjusting a spline will not change the position of a keyframe, so you don't need to worry too much about getting things out of sync. A keyframe can be clicked at any time to reveal the handles. You can also right-click in the Spline Editor. I'll select Ease from the menu. There are several options. The best thing is to try them out and see what they do. And if you need to get back to the original, just select Linear or click its button on the toolbar. I'll select In-Out Cubic. Let's go to the Edit page. If your animations are processor intensive, you'll need to enable render caching. From the Playback menu, select Render Cache User. A red line appears above the clip in the timeline. When it's entirely blue, the clip is rendered and will play back in real time. Sometimes the animation appears out of sync, but when it's rendered, it's fine. Just something to keep in mind. Okay, it's fully rendered. Let's play it full screen. I'll press Command F, Control F in Windows to enter full screen mode. Maybe a bit heavy-handed at the end, but pretty cool nonetheless. And there you have it, syncing animation with sound. Thanks for watching.